extremely painful childhood filled with much heartbreak and pain, you turned your life around, joined the military, and got married. But the one thing you still need to know is who is your dad, to prove he is your biological father. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Robinson, you claim that you've always known you are not Ms. Mueller's biological father and feel badly that you pretended to be just to stop her from being hurt. Is that correct?
When truth walks into the courtroom, it doesn't knock, it shatters everything. Under Judge Lauren Lake's gaze, lives are rewritten, families are reborn, and the DNA test becomes not just a piece of evidence, but a mirror reflecting everything people hide. Because sometimes, the truth changes everything. In a courtroom where emotions outweigh logic, where the relationship between law and justice is constantly tested, Judge Lauren Lake stands as the voice of both reason and compassion. Each case that unfolds before her isn't merely a legal battle. It's a human story, tangled between love, betrayal, and redemption. What happens when truth isn't just revealed but forced into the light? What happens when a single DNA test dismantles decades of secrets? This isn't about courtroom drama for spectacle. This is about people, real people, who stand on the stage of evidence with trembling hands, holding onto hope that maybe, this time, the truth will heal instead of hurt. But as Judge Lauren Lake often reminds her courtroom, truth doesn't always comfort. Sometimes it corrects. And correction, for many, is the beginning of clarity. The story begins with Ms. Mueller, a woman who's seen more pain than peace. Her past is layered with abandonment, self-reliance, and resilience. After surviving a childhood that offered little warmth, she rebuilt herself from ashes, serving her country in the military, earning academic honors, and creating a marriage filled with mutual love. Yet beneath that success lies a hole that no accomplishment can fill, the uncertainty of who her father truly is. She brings Mr. Robinson to court, the man she believes could be her biological father. What unfolds is more than testimony. It's confrontation between memory and denial, duty and truth. Mr. Robinson, a man torn between doubt and guilt, admits that while he signed her birth certificate and raised her for a time, he's never been sure of their blood connection. Still, he insists he did the right thing. But what is the right thing when love and truth contradict? Judge Lauren Lake listens, her courtroom steady but heavy. In the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, legal experts often discuss how law is meant to protect, while justice is meant to heal. Here, those two ideals collide. The concept of justice in jurisprudence becomes more than theory. It breathes through every tear, every accusation, and every DNA envelope sealed with uncertainty. Ms. Mueller's voice cracks when she says she felt thrown away. The phrase lingers not just as a daughter's pain, but as a universal cry of abandonment heard in every divorce case, every custody battle, every adoption story where identity becomes blurred by paperwork and circumstance. She wanted more than a verdict. She wanted belonging. She wanted her story rewritten. Judge Lake sees that longing. She reminds the courtroom that evidence isn't always found in paper trails. Sometimes it's found in emotional testimony, in how people carry the weight of doubt. That's why adverse inference in the Evidence Act isn't just a rule for missing documents. It's a symbol for the silence between fathers and daughters, husbands and wives, mothers and truth. And then comes the DNA test, the moment when technology meets destiny. When the results reveal that Mr. Robinson is indeed her father, silence overtakes the room. Applause follows not for victory but for vindication. The truth changes everything. Decades of denial collapse into one instant of undeniable proof. And in that moment, the courtroom doesn't feel like a battlefield. It feels like a sanctuary. This isn't about winning. It's about recovering, something often echoed in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where people speak about confronting their past not to erase it, but to understand it. Ms. Muller's truth becomes her recovery story, proof that even painful revelations can become steps toward healing. But the courtroom never sleeps. Another case, another life, another lesson. A young mother, Ms. Jefferson, walks into Judge Lake's court, clutching not just her newborn but her dignity. She's there to prove her faithfulness and to defend herself from Facebook rumors that have twisted her reality. Opposite her stands Mr. Singleton, the man who doubts not just her loyalty but the very paternity of their child. Their story isn't new: suspicion, betrayal, social media drama. But under Judge Lake's firm gaze, it transforms into something deeper. Because beneath their anger lies fear. The fear of being wrong about love, the fear of being used, the fear that their child will pay for their mistakes. Mr. Singleton admits he took the baby's clothes, nearly $2,000 worth, after being told to leave. His defense: he bought them. Her pain: that he took them. The argument spirals, mixing love and resentment until the judge cuts through the noise with the power of calm truth. Every case, she says, isn't just about law, it's about people who forgot how to see each other. When the Divorce Course podcast talks about emotional accountability, this is what they mean: that beyond legal rights lies the responsibility to act with humanity. Judge Lake channels this philosophy, reminding both parties that a child's welfare must rise above adult pride. The DNA test, once again, becomes the silent judge, and when it confirms that Mr. Singleton is indeed the father, the air shifts. Apologies replace accusations. Regret replaces ego. He admits his mistake, that doubt blinded him. She accepts his apology but refuses to erase the pain. It's not a fairy tale ending, but it's real, a moment of fragile maturity in the courtroom where truth always prevails. And through that truth, Judge Lauren Lake weaves another reminder. Justice isn't about proving who's right, it's about healing what's wrong. The third story enters like a storm: Hicks versus Narvies. A broken marriage, a child born into confusion, and a husband clinging to the hope that love can outlast betrayal. Robert Hicks believed he was the father. He was there for the birth, cut the umbilical cord and signed the birth certificate. To him, this wasn't just paperwork, it was proof of connection, proof that family could be built on devotion. But Ms. Narvies admits to cheating. She believes her lover, Mr. Osorio, is the true father. In this triangle of deception, law, emotion, and truth wrestle for dominance. Judge Lauren Lake listens as layers of deceit unfold. Accusations of manipulation, lies about pregnancy, and conflicting timelines paint a picture more complex than any legal textbook could illustrate. Here, the relationship between law and justice is at its most fragile, because while the law recognizes the husband as the legal father, since the child was born within the marriage, justice demands the truth about biology. This tension is what every game-changing attorney podcast episode tries to dissect, when emotion meets evidence and morality meets legislation. And then, in front of the entire courtroom, Lauren Lake opens the envelope. The truth, printed in ink, determines not just paternity but identity. The results: Robert Hicks is not the father. Gasps echo. Pain floods the room. But before resentment can fester, Judge Lake delivers a truth more powerful than any DNA report. Lies may break people, but truth rebuilds them. She reminds Ms. Narvies that while she sought temporary comfort in deception, the damage she caused is permanent. The courtroom falls silent not from shock, but from realization. This is what the concept of justice in jurisprudence looks like in its purest form: the restoration of moral balance, even when it hurts. But then another twist. A second test confirms that Mr. Osorio is the father. What once was chaos now becomes clarity. Yet clarity doesn't erase consequences. Judge Lake reminds them all that justice doesn't guarantee peace. It only offers the foundation for it. In that moment, the courtroom transforms again, not into a place of punishment, but into a place of truth recovery. Just like those who share their celebrate recovery testimonies, each person must face the past they built and the future they can still rebuild. Judge Lake's closing words linger like a verdict from the heart. You can't rewrite your past, but you can stop lying to your future. In the Truth Changes Everything podcast episode inspired by these cases, the theme becomes crystal clear. DNA doesn't just test parentage, it tests integrity. Every envelope carries not just biological evidence but emotional consequence. It's a reminder that in the courtroom of life, truth is the only witness that never lies. Through stories like Ms. Muller's search for belonging, Ms. Jefferson's defense of dignity, and Mr. Hicks's heartbreak, we see the recurring pattern of human vulnerability. Each story becomes a mirror for society's obsession with truth, its fear of exposure, and its craving for forgiveness. And in every reflection there stands one constant: Judge Lauren Lake. Her compassion is her gavel, her wisdom the unseen law. She represents the bridge between logic and empathy, between the legal system and the spiritual system that governs conscience. Her courtroom becomes more than a set. It becomes a sanctuary where truth heals, evidence speaks, and justice breathes. Truth has a rhythm. It doesn't rush, it waits. And in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, that rhythm builds slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Each case that unfolds doesn't just reveal evidence, it dissects the human heart under oath. From the quiet tears of daughters to the defiant stares of fathers, every emotion becomes a legal statement, every confession a kind of recovery. Because here, under the fluorescent light of justice, truth changes everything. After the verdicts, the courtroom doesn't rest. The echo of revelation lingers long after the audience leaves. Lauren Lake often says that a DNA test doesn't just determine paternity, it determines direction. It changes where a family goes next, how a heart heals, or how trust rebuilds. And that's what makes her courtroom so different from any other. It's not a place of punishment, but of purpose. In the days that follow, stories ripple outward. Ms. Muller, who once felt abandoned, now carries her truth like a badge, both heavy and holy. She no longer wonders where she comes from. Her father, Mr. Robinson, no longer hides behind doubt. The truth has made them both accountable. What began as pain has become possibility. Judge Lake reminds them that justice is not about winning. It's about reconciling what's been broken. That principle lies at the core of both the Game Changing Attorney podcast and the Divorce Course podcast. Justice as transformation, not retaliation. Because in every courtroom there are two types of evidence: the kind that proves a fact and the kind that exposes a soul. The concept of justice in jurisprudence teaches that fairness is blind. But in real life, fairness often has a face: a trembling mother, a grieving father, a confused child. And in the space between law and emotion, Judge Lake stands as the interpreter of truth. When she calls the next case, Hicks versus Narvi's, there's a different kind of tension. It's not loud, it's quiet, suffocating. You can feel it even before the words begin. Mr. Hicks sits tall, the image of hope clinging to faith. Beside him, Ms. Narvi's looks unflinching, armored by her own choices. The air is thick with regret. She admits to cheating calmly, almost coldly, as if confession itself were another defense strategy. He, on the other hand, speaks not as a lawyer would, but as a father who's been betrayed by biology. He wants the truth, but he also fears it. That contradiction is something Judge Lake understands well. In her courtroom, she has seen people regret taking a DNA test, not because of the result, but because of what the result exposed inside them: guilt, shame, lost time, false pride. When the truth finally lands that Mr. Hicks is not the father, the courtroom gasps. The words slice through silence like a verdict written by fate itself. For Mr. Hicks, the loss is deeper than legal. It's emotional death. He raised that child. He gave her his last name. He cut her umbilical cord. He believed. And now the truth tells him he was living a beautiful lie. Judge Lake looks at him, steady and compassionate, and says something that feels less like a ruling and more like grace. You may not be her biological father, but you were her real one, because real fathers are measured by presence, not blood. That moment becomes its own celebrate recovery testimony. Not in the church sense, but in the human sense, recovery from deception, from heartbreak, from the need to always be right. Truth in Judge Lake's courtroom isn't a weapon, it's medicine. But what happens when that medicine burns before it heals? That's the question that haunts every evidence stage in a divorce case. Because sometimes, evidence doesn't just prove guilt, it destroys the little faith that was left. In the Divorce Course podcast, lawyers often talk about adverse inference in the Evidence Act, where silence or missing proof becomes an implication of guilt. Judge Lake sees that every day, but not just in documents, in people. When a husband avoids eye contact, when a mother hesitates before answering, when a child looks down instead of up, those silences tell more truth than any signed affidavit. One afternoon, Judge Lake recalls a man who stood before her, trembling not from fear but from fatigue. He'd spent months fighting for custody, months gathering evidence of loyalty and love. But what finally won his case wasn't paperwork, it was honesty. When she asked him, "What do you want from this court?" he replied, "I just want to stop being angry." That answer, she later said on her Truth Changes Everything podcast, was the real definition of justice. The moment someone stops fighting for victory and starts fighting for peace. In between hearings, Judge Lake often reflects on the bridge between law and humanity. It's a theme echoed in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where legal experts talk about empathy in litigation, the balance between intellect and intuition. And it's what makes her courtroom so transformative. She doesn't just quote the law, she feels it. When people enter her court, they expect rulings, they leave with revelations. Because in her presence, truth is not an attack, it's an awakening. And for those who resist it, Judge Lake has a simple warning. The truth you avoid becomes the sentence you serve. That's why her cases resonate so deeply, not because of their drama, but because they mirror the human struggle to balance love with truth, comfort with honesty, law with grace. In one memorable episode discussed in the Divorce Course podcast, a man argued that his wife's infidelity was irrelevant to their divorce. "We're just incompatible," he said. But when confronted with text messages, financial lies, and emotional manipulation, the real story emerged. It wasn't incompatibility, it was avoidance. And avoidance, as Judge Lake often says, is the soft form of dishonesty. These stories remind us why people turn to DNA tests, podcasts, and even the courtroom itself, not just for proof, but for peace. Because deep down, what they're seeking isn't scientific validation, it's spiritual closure. And that's where Judge Lauren Lake transforms from a judge into something more profound, a teacher of truth. Her courtroom may be grounded in law, but her lessons belong to life. In one adoption story that aired in full, a young woman wanted to confirm if her biological mother had lied about her origins. The test revealed that she was adopted, something she had suspected but never confirmed. The moment was heartbreaking, yet strangely freeing. Judge Lake looked at her and said, "Now that you know who gave you life, go find who will help you live it." It wasn't about judgment, it was about release. about giving permission to stop searching for validation and start building identity. That's why her show resonates beyond the courtroom. Listeners of The Truth Changes Everything podcast describe her episodes as therapy disguised as law. She bridges the gap between evidence and empathy, between the Constitution and the conscience. Her words echo in the minds of viewers who, like her litigants, are seeking personal recovery. You can't claim justice if you're still lying to yourself. In this realm of truth and transformation, the DNA test becomes more than science. It becomes scripture, a text of reality, a holy moment of reckoning. But Judge Lake never lets that truth exist alone. She weaves it into context, compassion, and consequence. Because the truth without love, she says, is just another form of cruelty. When a young couple once confessed to manipulating DNA test results to frame each other, she didn't erupt in anger. She paused and said, "You both wanted to win so badly, you forgot what you were fighting for." It wasn't a reprimand, it was revelation. The courtroom fell silent. Even the audience felt the weight of her words. This is where the relationship between law and justice comes alive. Not in textbooks, but in human behavior. Justice, in her eyes, isn't about punishment. It's about alignment, aligning one's actions with truth, one's choices with integrity, and one's past with forgiveness. Every episode becomes its own testimony of recovery. Each litigant a storyteller of their own redemption. And while many walk in trembling with fear, they often walk out with something far more valuable than a verdict: closure. That closure is rarely easy. In fact, it often hurts first. But as Judge Lake often quotes, pain is the proof that the truth has entered. Through Celebrate Recovery testimonies and legal insights from the Game Changing Attorney podcast, her philosophy remains consistent. People don't come to court to destroy each other. They come to be set free, even when they don't realize it. For Ms. Mueller, freedom came through acceptance. For Ms. Jefferson, through vindication. For Mr. Hicks, through loss, but also through awakening. Different truths, same outcome: liberation. The courtroom lights dim. The audience murmurs, but Judge Lake's words still hang in the air like quiet thunder. You can't hide from a DNA test or from your reflection in it. And that's the paradox of truth. It exposes, but it also empowers. It breaks hearts, but rebuilds them stronger. It ends lies, but begins lives. Her show is more than a legal series. It's a human experiment, an exploration of what happens when truth and justice meet in public view, under oath, guided by a woman who refuses to let the law lose its heart. Every case is a reminder that the world doesn't need more verdicts. It needs more understanding. And every envelope she opens doesn't just prove who someone is, it reveals who they've become. There's a moment just after every verdict when the courtroom falls silent. The audience holds its breath, the litigants blink through disbelief, and Judge Lauren Lake lowers her eyes, not out of weariness but reflection. It's in that silence that justice breathes, because justice in her world is not the sound of a gavel striking wood, it's the sound of truth settling into the human soul. Each episode ends differently, some in tears, some in gratitude, some in quiet confrontation. But all of them end with one shared reality: the truth changes everything. When Lauren Lake speaks, her words carry both authority and empathy. She doesn't hide behind legal jargon or cold precedent. She looks people in the eyes and reminds them that the law may determine rights, but truth determines redemption. That's what separates her courtroom from all others. She doesn't merely interpret the law, she humanizes it. It's a courtroom philosophy often explored on the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where high-profile attorneys talk about the morality behind the law. But here, It isn't theory, it's life in real time. The balance between reason and emotion, between what's legal and what's right, becomes a visible dance in front of millions. The relationship between law and justice is fragile, and nowhere is it more evident than in cases like Mueller v. Robinson, Jefferson v. Singleton, and Hicks v. Narvaez. In each, the letter of the law stands beside the weight of emotion, and Judge Lake guides both toward reconciliation. After Mr. Hicks learns the truth that the child he raised is not biologically his, he breaks down. The pain isn't just personal, it's existential. For years, he lived as a father. Now, with a single sentence, that identity seems stripped away. The audience watches, unsure whether to clap, cry, or stay still. But then Judge Lake speaks. "Mr. Hicks," she says softly, "biology builds bodies, not bonds. You were there when that child took her first breath. Don't erase that because the truth arrived late." In those few words, she gives back something the test took away, meaning. Because truth, as powerful as it is, can sometimes leave destruction in its wake. And in those moments, Lauren Lake becomes not just a judge, but a restorer. It's what listeners of the Divorce Course podcast call the Lake Principle. Truth first, healing second, peace last, in that order. Because without truth, there can be no peace. But without peace, truth can become unbearable. Her courtroom often functions like a public therapy session, part law, part soul work. Each case unravels the same pattern: denial, confrontation, acceptance, and, finally, forgiveness. It mirrors the structure of Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals confess their deepest regrets, not for sympathy but for freedom. Judge Lake's cases are those testimonies in motion. When Ms. Mueller finally embraces Mr. Robinson after decades of doubt, it's more than reconciliation. It's symbolic, a living representation of what justice looks like when stripped of its courtroom polish. It's forgiveness meeting fact. It's the merging of what was broken with what's now known. And when Ms. Jefferson forgives Mr. Singleton for doubting her, her strength becomes contagious. Truth doesn't ruin love, Judge Lake reminds them.